Mom, it's time to admit that you can no longer manage your finances safely.
You would betray your own mother like this? We just want to help, Mom.
This is for your own good, Mom. Are you absolutely certain you want this file opened here?
Open it. I have nothing to hide. Please, don't.
Open it, please.
Let's see it.
Oh, God, I knew it. The records show an unexpected shortfall.
Impossible. That can't be right.
Son, we need to understand this.
My mother can't manage money safely anymore. My son said it calmly, as if he were discussing a broken appliance instead of me. Across the conference table, my daughter lowered her eyes. My daughter-in-law folded her hands. And Thomas Grant, the accountant who had handled our family finances for more than 20 years, simply stared at Michael. Then Thomas asked, "Are you sure you want me to open Allison's private file in front of everyone?" Michael leaned back confidently. "That's exactly why we're here." Thomas reached into a locked cabinet and placed a thick navy folder on the table. When he opened the first page, the confidence disappeared from my son's face. And that was only the beginning. Before I tell you what was inside that file, I'd love to know what you would have done in my place. How would you feel if your own child told your family that you were no longer capable of managing your own money? If this story already speaks to you, please give it a like and subscribe so we can share more stories about family dignity, betrayal, and second chances. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Before my son decided I was helpless, I had spent nearly 70 years proving to myself that I was anything but. 3 years before that meeting in Thomas Grant's office, my husband David died on a quiet Tuesday morning in March. There was no dramatic goodbye, no long hospital vigil, no final speech. He kissed me before breakfast, complained that the coffee was too weak, and went outside to check a loose gutter above the garage. By noon, I was a widow. I was a widow. For the first few months, grief rearranged my entire life. I kept reaching across the bed at night and finding cold sheets. I still bought 2 bananas instead of 1. I caught myself turning toward the passenger seat to tell David something before remembering there was no one there. But grief did not make me incapable. If anything, it made me more careful. I was 66, then living in the same modest brick house in Richmond, Virginia, that David and I had bought nearly 35 years earlier. The mortgage had been paid off for more than a decade. The kitchen still had the oak cabinets David wanted to replace but never did. My bedroom carpet was old enough to remember both of my children being teenagers. The front porch leaned slightly to the left because David had insisted he could repair it himself. Nothing about my home looked wealthy. Neither did I. I drove a 12-year-old silver Toyota Camry with a tiny crack near the bottom of the windshield. I used grocery coupons. I waited for department store sales. I still compared the price per ounce on laundry detergent because habits learned during lean years do not disappear just because your bank account grows healthier. Michael used to laugh about it. "You know you're allowed to buy the good coffee now, Mom," he once told me when he saw me comparing 2 brands at the grocery store. "The cheaper one tastes the same after cream," I said. He shook his head. "You and Dad saved money like the Depression was coming back." I smiled. What Michael did not understand was that habits like mine were exactly why David and I had never needed to panic about money. For 31 years, I had worked as an office manager and bookkeeper for a small construction company outside Richmond. I handled payroll, vendor invoices, insurance, renewals, tax documents, expense reports, overdue accounts, and more spreadsheets than I care to remember. I knew how quickly a healthy company could get into trouble when people stopped paying attention. And I knew the difference between looking rich and being financially secure. David trusted me with nearly every major financial decision in our marriage. He had been good with people. I had been good with numbers. That combination had served us well. Whenever one of the children asked him about money, David would point toward me and say, "If you want to know where our money is, ask your mother." Michael used to roll his eyes when he heard it. Emily usually laughed. At the time, none of us realized how important those words would become. After David died, I took over everything alone: insurance, taxes, retirement distributions, property records, investment statements, beneficiary documents. I had no desire to become obsessed with money, but I refused to become careless with something David and I had spent our entire marriage building. Every Monday morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a yellow legal pad. I reviewed what had cleared. I checked upcoming expenses. I filed statements. I balanced accounts. Some people knit. Some people garden. I organized paperwork. It calmed me. Michael thought it was old-fashioned. "Mom, everything is online now," he told me one afternoon. "I know. Then why do you still print statements because computers crash?" He laughed. "You sound 90. I'm planning to reach 90 with organized records." He kissed my forehead and called me stubborn. Back then it still felt affectionate. Michael was 43 and owned a home renovation company. He had started it years earlier with 1 truck and 2 employees. For a while he did very well. He remodeled kitchens, finished basements, built additions, and eventually began taking on larger projects. David had been proud of him. So was I. Michael had always been ambitious. Sometimes too ambitious, perhaps, but I believed ambition was better than laziness. His wife Rachel handled some scheduling and marketing for the company. They lived about 20 minutes from me with their 2 children. My daughter Emily lived in North Carolina and worked as a nurse. Because Michael lived nearby, he naturally saw me more often. At first, his visits after David's death felt comforting. He checked the gutters, changed air filters, carried heavy boxes from the attic. Sometimes he came over just to drink coffee. I appreciated it. Then slowly his questions began changing. One Saturday morning, we were sitting at my kitchen table when Michael looked around and asked, "The house is paid off, right?" "Yes, no mortgage at all, not for years." He nodded as though confirming something for himself. I thought nothing of it. A few weeks later, while helping me move some Christmas decorations, he asked, "How much do you actually get from retirement every month?" I laughed. "Enough. I'm serious. So am I." He smiled, but his eyes stayed on me. Another time he asked whether Emily and he were still listed as beneficiaries on my accounts. That question bothered me more. "Why are you asking? I'm just making sure everything is organized." "It is." He shrugged. "After Dad died, I figured maybe you changed things." I studied him for a moment. "Michael, if I make changes to my estate plan, I'll discuss whatever needs discussing." He seemed embarrassed. "Mom, I'm not asking because I want anything. I didn't say you were." But something had shifted. Soon he was asking about online banking, whether I had trouble remembering passwords, whether automatic payments confused me, whether I had considered simplifying my investments. He asked the questions casually, always wrapped in concern. At first I found it almost sweet. Children worry when parents get older. I understood that. Then, one afternoon, Michael came by while I was paying bills. He stood behind me looking at my laptop. "You should add me to these accounts," he said. I turned around. "For what, just in case?" "In case of what you know. Emergency. Hospital. Something happens. I already have documents for emergencies." He pulled out the chair across from me. "I mean as an authorized person. Someone who can step in." "I don't need anyone stepping in. Not now." I looked at him. There was something in the way he said those 2 words. Not now. As if the future had already been decided. As if decline were simply waiting for its turn. I closed my laptop. "Michael, I appreciate the concern, but I manage my own accounts." He gave me an easy smile. "Okay. I'm just trying to make things easier." "I know." He leaned over and kissed my cheek. Then he left. But through the front window, I watched him sit in his truck for several minutes before driving away. And for the first time, I wondered whether my son was thinking about my future because he loved me, or because he was beginning to think my future belonged to him. The first story Michael told about me was small enough to sound believable. That was what made it dangerous. It happened at Sunday dinner about 3 weeks after he suggested adding himself to my bank accounts. Emily was visiting from North Carolina for the weekend, and I had cooked pot roast because it was one of the few meals everyone still agreed tasted better at my house than anywhere else. Rachel brought a salad. Michael brought wine. For the first hour, everything felt normal. We talked about Emily's hospital schedule, the children's school activities, and a renovation project Michael's company had just finished in Short Pump. Then while I was carrying plates to the kitchen, Michael said something that made me stop. Mom, did you ever get that utility payment straightened out? I turned around. What utility payment? He looked at Emily, the one she paid twice. Emily's expression changed immediately. You paid a bill twice, I did not. Michael gave me a patient smile. Yes, you did. Remember you told me there were 2 charges from Dominion. I set the plates down. There were 2 payments, Michael. They weren't for the same thing. He leaned back in his chair. Mom, they were both utility related. That does not mean they were duplicate payments. Rachel looked between us. What was the second one for a deposit connected to the water heater replacement? My old water heater had failed a month earlier. The plumber needed electrical work done before installing the new unit, and part of that expense had appeared under a utility-related service account. I had explained it to Michael when he happened to see the statement sitting on my kitchen table. Apparently, he had remembered the 2 amounts. He had simply forgotten the explanation. Or chosen to. Emily frowned. So nothing was paid twice, no? Michael lifted his hands. Okay. Maybe I misunderstood. His tone made it sound generous, as if he were giving me the benefit of the doubt. Then he added, It's just that little things like that worry me. Something tightened in my chest. What little things? He took a sip of wine. Nothing major. Then why bring them up because you're alone now? Emily glanced at me. Mom, he's just worried about you. I looked at my daughter. I understand that. But there is a difference between worrying about me and telling people I made mistakes I didn't make. Michael sighed. No one is attacking you. That sentence irritated me more than the original accusation. People often say no one is attacking you immediately after saying something designed to put you on the defensive. I sat back down. Then let's be accurate. Michael nodded. Fine. The subject changed. At least on the surface. But I noticed Emily watching me differently for the rest of dinner. Not dramatically, just small things. When I reached for the salt and knocked my napkin onto the floor, she bent down quickly to pick it up. When I forgot where I had put the serving spoon, she found it beside the stove and smiled too brightly. It was absurd. I had misplaced serving spoons when I was 35. No one had considered it evidence of mental decline then. That night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the kitchen rinsing plates and thinking about Michael's words. Little things like that worry me. I told myself not to overreact. Maybe he truly had misunderstood the bill. Maybe grief had made me sensitive. Maybe this was simply what happened when adult children began seeing their parents as older. I wanted to believe that. A month later, Michael told another story. This time it happened during a phone call with Emily. She had put me on speaker while Michael happened to be at her house during a visit. We were talking about her daughter's birthday when Michael suddenly said, Mom, did you get your bank card working again? I frowned. What do you mean, the PIN issue? Emily immediately asked. What PIN issue? I felt that same uncomfortable pressure behind my ribs. There was no PIN issue. Michael laughed softly. Mom, you couldn't remember your PIN at the bank. That is not what happened. There was silence. Then Emily said, What happened? My debit card was replaced because the old one expired. The new card wasn't activated properly. The machine rejected it. Michael said, That's not what you told me. Yes, it is. No, you said the PIN wasn't working. Because the card wasn't activated. Rachel's voice came faintly from somewhere near Michael. Well, those things happen as people get older. For several seconds I said nothing. The sentence was not openly cruel. That almost made it worse. Rachel had turned a technical problem with a bank card into another piece of evidence about my age. I was not confused, I said. Michael immediately softened his voice. Mom, nobody said you were. You just told Emily I forgot my PIN. I said there was an issue. No, you said I couldn't remember it. Emily tried to calm things down. Mom, please don't get upset. And there it was. Another shift. Suddenly the problem was not the false statement. The problem was my reaction to it. I ended the call soon afterward. That evening I sat at my kitchen table with my yellow legal pad in front of me. For the first time, instead of writing expenses, I wrote down conversations. Utility payment. Debit card. Questions about beneficiaries. Request for account access. I stared at the page for a long time. One incident could be misunderstanding. Two could be coincidence. But when someone repeatedly retells ordinary events in ways that make you seem less capable, you begin to wonder whether the pattern matters more than the details. Over the next several weeks, I became aware of how Michael framed almost everything I did. If I asked him to repeat something, I was having trouble keeping track. If I declined to use a banking app, he recommended I was uncomfortable with technology. If I chose not to discuss investments with him, I was getting overwhelmed by financial decisions. None of those statements was dramatic enough to challenge individually. Together they formed a picture. And it was not a picture of me. It was a picture Michael was creating. The realization hurt because I had always trusted him. When Michael was a boy, he had been the child who told me everything. Broken windows, bad grades, the first girl who broke his heart. Even when he made mistakes, I never wanted him to feel that coming to me was dangerous. Now I was beginning to feel that ordinary moments in my life were becoming material he could use against me. Then one Thursday afternoon, the bank called. I almost ignored the number because I was folding laundry. Mrs. Reed. Yes, this is Karen from Commonwealth Community Bank. I'm calling regarding an inquiry we received about your accounts. I sat down. What inquiry? She hesitated. A gentleman identifying himself as your son asked about becoming an authorized helper on your profile. My fingers went still around the phone. Michael. Yes, ma'am. What exactly did he ask? He wanted to know whether he could be added to receive account information and assist with transactions. Did you give him anything? No. He isn't listed as an authorized party, so we explained that we couldn't discuss account details. I stared across the room at David's photograph on the bookshelf. When did he call yesterday morning? My mouth went dry. Michael had not mentioned anything to me. Not before the call. Not after. Thank you for telling me. We just wanted to verify that you hadn't requested a change. I did not. After I hung up, I stayed sitting in the same chair. The house was completely quiet. For the first time, I stopped asking myself whether Michael was simply worried. Concern asks permission. Concern respects an answer. Concern does not quietly contact your bank after you have already said no. I looked down at the notes on my legal pad. The stories about the bill, the PIN, the questions, the account request. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think something I had been resisting. My son was not just worried about my ability to manage money, he was trying to position himself closer to it. After the bank called, I stopped dismissing my discomfort as oversensitivity. I did not confront Michael immediately. That surprised even me. For most of my life, I had believed problems should be addressed directly. If an invoice was wrong, I called the vendor. If an employee made a mistake, I corrected it. If David and I disagreed, we talked until one of us admitted we were wrong, or both of us became too tired to continue. But this was different. Michael was my son. And accusing your own child of trying to gain access to your money is not something you do based on a feeling. So I watched. And almost immediately I began noticing how differently everyone was treating me. Emily started calling more often. At first I thought she was simply being thoughtful. Then her questions changed. Mom, did you remember to pay your homeowner's insurance? Yes. And the property taxes they're handled. What about your credit card? I stared at the phone. Emily, why are you asking me this? A pause. No reason. That isn't true. She sighed. Michael said you've been getting overwhelmed with paperwork. I almost laughed. Instead, I looked at the 3 neatly labeled folders sitting on my kitchen table. Did Michael tell you that? He just said there have been some little things. There were those words again. Little things. They were becoming a language of their own. Emily. I managed payroll for more than 30 years. I know. I filed tax records for an entire company. I know, Mom. Then why are you asking me whether I remembered to pay my credit card? Her voice softened. Because people change. The words landed harder than she probably intended. What exactly do you think has changed? I don't know. Then maybe you should ask before assuming. She went quiet. A few seconds later, she said, Michael sees you more than I do. That sentence stayed with me long after we hung up. Michael sees you more than I do. It meant his version of me carried more weight because he lived 20 minutes away. If he said I was becoming forgetful, Emily had no daily evidence to contradict him. If he said I was confused by money, she believed he was observing something I could not see in myself. That was the cleverest part of what was happening. The more I defended myself, the easier it became to make my defense sound like denial. Rachel joined in too. One Saturday, she stopped by with homemade soup and noticed a stack of mail beside the fruit bowl. "You should let Michael go through your financial mail," she said. I looked up from the crossword puzzle I was doing. "Why, just to make sure nothing important gets missed." "Nothing gets missed." She gave me a sympathetic smile. "I know, but it would take pressure off you." "I'm not under pressure. I'm not saying you are." But she was. They all were. A week later, Michael came over with his laptop. "I found something that might help," he said. He showed me a personal finance application that could connect all my accounts in one place. "It tracks everything automatically." "I already track everything." "Not like this. I don't need it." "Mom, it sends alerts if something unusual happens. I can see unusual transactions myself." He exhaled sharply. "Why do you make everything difficult?" I closed the laptop screen gently. "Because you keep offering solutions to problems I don't have." For a moment, the friendly concern disappeared from his face. Then it returned. "Fine. Forget it." I watched him carry the computer back to his truck. Something inside me hardened, not against my son, against the story being built around me. A few days later, that story gained another chapter. I had moved $9,000 out of a savings account. There was nothing unusual about it. Interest rates had changed, and after reviewing my cash reserves, I decided to put part of the money into a short-term treasury bill. I had discussed the move briefly with Thomas Grant's office, checked the maturity date, and made the transfer. 2 days later, Michael called. "Mom, why did you take $9,000 out of savings?" My hand tightened around the phone. For a second, I forgot to answer. Not because I was confused, because I was stunned. "Excuse me? The $9,000. I heard you. Why did you move it?" I walked slowly to the kitchen table and sat down. "How do you know I moved $9,000? There was silence. Then he said, "You must have mentioned it." "I didn't. Maybe I saw something when I was over." "What would you have seen?" Another pause. "Mom, that's not the point." "It is exactly the point." He changed direction quickly. "Okay, fine. Why did you withdraw that much money?" "I didn't withdraw it. You moved it out of savings." "Yes. To where I'm not discussing my accounts with you." His voice sharpened. "This is what I mean." "What do you mean you're making strange financial decisions and refusing to explain them?" I felt anger rise through me. There is nothing strange about moving my own money. $9,000 is not a small amount. It is not an amount you are responsible for. He let out a frustrated breath. "Do you hear yourself?" I almost smiled at the absurdity. "Yes, Michael. I hear myself very clearly." He lowered his voice. "I'm worried you sent it somewhere you shouldn't have." I thought about telling him. I could have said the money had purchased a treasury bill. I could have given him the confirmation number. I could have explained the yield maturity period and reason for moving the funds. I could have proven once again that there was a perfectly sensible explanation. But suddenly, I did not want to. Because I realized something important. Every time Michael questioned me, I felt pressured to demonstrate my competence. That was backwards. He had no right to demand explanations for decisions that belonged to me. So I said, "The money is exactly where I intended it to be." "That doesn't answer my question." "It answers the only question that concerns you." He went silent. Then he said, "Emily needs to know about this." My stomach tightened. "Why?" "Because if something is happening, we should both be aware." "Something is happening, Michael." He sounded relieved, as though I had finally admitted weakness. "What my son somehow knows about a private banking transaction, he should not be able to see." Silence. Longer this time. Then he said, "You're being paranoid." That word chilled me. Paranoid. Not cautious, not private. Paranoid. Another label. Another way to turn my concern into evidence against me. I have to go, I said. Mom, I ended the call. Then I opened my laptop. I checked my banking profile first. Michael was not an authorized user, no linked accounts, no secondary access. I checked email security. Nothing obvious. Then I went through paper statements and recent mail. Still nothing. For the next hour, I searched for a simple explanation. Had I left a statement on the counter? Had the bank mailed something while Michael was at my house? Had I mentioned the amount without remembering? That last thought disturbed me most. Not because I believed it, because Michael had already trained me to question myself. I stood up from the table and walked into the hallway. David's photograph was still there, the one taken on our 35th anniversary. He had his hand on my shoulder, and that crooked smile he wore whenever he hated having his picture taken. "What am I missing?" I whispered. Of course, the photograph did not answer. But I remembered something David used to say whenever numbers did not make sense. Don't start with the explanation you want. Start with the fact you know. So I did. Fact 1. Michael knew I had moved exactly $9,000. Fact 2. I had not told him. Fact 3. He did not have authorized access to my account. Fact 4. This came after he had already contacted my bank, asking how to become involved in my finances. I wrote all 4 facts on my yellow legal pad. Then I underlined the last one. For the first time, I was no longer asking whether Michael was becoming too involved. I was asking something much more serious. How was my son getting information about my money, and what did he plan to do with it? 3 days after I wrote those 4 facts on my yellow legal pad, I found the envelope. It was lying on the small table beside my kitchen window, underneath a grocery circular and a church newsletter. At first, there was nothing unusual about it. The return address belonged to an investment company I had used for years. My name was printed correctly. My address was correct. But the flap had already been opened. I stood there for several seconds with the envelope in my hand. I was certain I had not opened it. I was equally certain I had not received it earlier. The mail had come while I was at a dental appointment, and I had picked the stack up from the floor beneath the mail slot when I returned. The envelope should have been sealed. Instead, someone had carefully lifted the flap and pressed it closed again. I checked the contents. Nothing appeared missing. It was only a quarterly statement. Still, my stomach tightened. Michael had a key to my house. He had possessed one for years. David and I had given both children emergency keys long ago. Emily's was mostly symbolic because she lived in North Carolina. Michael's made practical sense. If I fell, if a pipe burst, if an alarm went off while I was away. There had always been trust attached to that key. Now, for the first time, I looked at it differently. I hated myself for that. I did not want to become a woman who suspected her own child every time something was out of place. So I refused to jump to conclusions. Maybe the envelope had torn during sorting. Maybe the adhesive failed. Maybe I had opened it absent-mindedly. I almost laughed when that last possibility crossed my mind. That was exactly how doubt worked. Once someone repeatedly suggested your memory was failing, even ordinary uncertainty began to feel like evidence against yourself. I put the statement into my financial folder and wrote one sentence on my legal pad. Investment envelope found opened before I reviewed it. No accusation, just a fact. 2 evenings later, Michael appeared at my door carrying a folder. He did not call first. That was not unusual. He had always dropped by casually. But this time he seemed prepared. "Got a minute?" he asked. "I suppose." He walked into the kitchen and placed the folder on the table. "I've been thinking about what happened with the bank." "So have I." He avoided my eyes. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. That depends on what you think the right foot is." He pulled out a chair. "Can we not argue? I'm not arguing." He smiled briefly. "See that tone?" I stared at him. What tone? Nothing. There it was again. A tiny suggestion that my reaction was the problem. Michael opened the folder. I had someone prepare something. He slid 3 pages across the table. At the top of the first page were the words, "Family Financial Assistance Authorization." I did not touch it immediately. What is this? Exactly what it says. That explains very little. It would let me help if you needed me. I already told you I don't need you on my accounts. This isn't the same thing. He tapped the first page with his index finger. It's just an authorization, not ownership, not anything permanent. I picked it up. Michael watched me while I read. That alone told me something. If he truly believed the paper was harmless, he would not have been studying my face so closely. The first paragraph sounded comforting. It described the purpose as assisting a family member with financial organization communication and emergency support. The second paragraph was more specific. It authorized the designated person to communicate with banks, brokerage firms, insurance companies, tax professionals, and other financial institutions on my behalf. I kept reading. Michael shifted in his chair. It's standard language. Please let me finish. On the second page, the wording changed again. The designated assistant could receive account information and records, could discuss balances and transactions, could communicate instructions regarding payments under certain circumstances. And then I reached the sentence that mattered. The authorization could become operational if the account holder was determined to be unable to manage her financial affairs. I looked up. Who determines that? Michael blinked. What? Who determines whether I'm unable to manage my financial affairs? He leaned toward the paper. I don't know. A doctor, probably. It doesn't say doctor. Then maybe whoever handles these things. Mom, you're getting lost in legal language. No, Michael. I'm reading legal language. His jaw tightened. I continued. Another clause allowed the authorized person to request records from institutions for the purpose of evaluating financial capacity. Another permitted communication with estate planning professionals. Another stated that institutions could rely upon the authorization unless they had notice of its revocation. I put the pages down. This is not a simple emergency contact form. He sighed. I never said it was an emergency contact form. You said it just lets you help. That is what it does. It gives you access to financial information, so I can help. It gives you authority to communicate about transactions, so I can help. It contains language about me being unable to manage my affairs. His voice rose slightly. Because that is when I would need to help. I held his gaze. Then why do I need to sign it while I am fully capable? He looked away. For a moment the kitchen became very quiet. Then he said, because you prepare before an emergency, not after one. That argument sounded reasonable. Almost. But too many other things surrounded it now. The bank call. The stories he told Emily. The opened envelope. The $9,000 transfer he somehow knew about. I folded my hands on the table. Who prepared this? A friend. What friend? Someone who works with estate planning. An attorney. He works around it. That is not what I asked. Michael leaned back. Why does that matter? Because if someone is drafting documents affecting my financial authority, I want to know their qualifications. His face hardened. This is exactly why I'm concerned. I felt my pulse rise. Explain that. You turn everything into an interrogation now. You brought me a document that affects my bank accounts. I brought you something to protect you. Then you should have no problem answering questions about it. He pushed his chair back slightly. You know what? Forget it. I did not move. No. Sit down. That surprised him. It surprised me too. He stared at me for a moment, then remained seated. I tapped the document. I'm not signing this. His expression changed instantly. Not sadness, not concern, anger. Why not? Because I don't need it. You didn't even think about it. I read it. For 5 minutes. I spent 31 years reading documents tied to money. 5 minutes was enough to know I'm not signing this one. Michael shook his head. You're proving my point. I felt something cold settle inside me. What point? That you don't understand what I'm trying to do? I leaned forward. No, Michael. My voice was quiet now. I understand exactly what this document does. He stopped. For perhaps 2 seconds I saw something on his face I had not seen before. Not frustration. Alarm. Then it vanished. He grabbed the pages and shoved them back into the folder. You always think you know everything. No. I stood. But I know my own finances. Michael pushed back from the table. I'm trying to keep you from making a mistake. And I'm trying to understand why my son is so determined to get access to something I haven't asked him to manage. His eyes narrowed. That's a terrible thing to say. Then help me understand why it's wrong. He did not answer. He picked up the folder and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned around. When something goes wrong, don't say I didn't try. Then he left. I remained in the kitchen staring at the empty chair across from me. My hands were shaking. Not because I doubted myself, because I finally understood that this had moved beyond casual concern. Michael was trying to formalize access. Maybe he believed his reasons were justified. Maybe he had convinced himself he was protecting me. But I was no longer willing to interpret everything in the kindest possible way simply because he was my son. I took out my yellow legal pad. Under the previous notes I wrote, Michael brought financial authorization. Refused to identify who drafted it. Became angry when I declined. Then I opened my contact list. Thomas Grant's name had been there for years. David and I had trusted him with taxes, retirement planning, business records, and enough financial conversations to fill a filing cabinet. I had not spoken to him privately in several months. I pressed the number. His assistant answered. Grant Accounting, this is Allison Reed. I need an appointment with Thomas. Of course. Is this about taxes? I looked at the closed front door. No. I lowered my voice, though there was no one else in the house. It's about my son. There was a pause. Then she said, I'll see when Thomas can fit you in. I looked down at the list of facts I had been collecting. For the first time since this began, I felt something other than confusion. I felt prepared. Because Michael might have been telling everyone a story about me. But stories are one thing, records are another. And I had spent my entire adult life keeping records. Thomas Grant's office was on the third floor of a brick building near downtown Richmond, above a law practice and across from a coffee shop David used to love. I had been there dozens of times. Tax season, retirement planning. The year we sold a small rental property. The year David finally admitted we needed to update our estate documents. But walking into that office alone felt different. Thomas had known us for more than 20 years. He had gray hair, now heavier glasses, and the same habit of reading a document twice before saying anything important. When his assistant closed the door behind me, he did not begin with small talk. You sounded worried on the phone. I am. He folded his hands. Tell me everything. So I did. I started with Michael asking about the house, then the beneficiaries, the online banking questions, the story about the utility payment, the debit card, the bank call, the $9,000 transfer Michael somehow knew about, and finally the authorization form he wanted me to sign. Thomas did not interrupt except to ask dates. That comforted me. He did not gasp. He did not immediately accuse Michael of anything. He simply listened and took notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Do you have the document? No. Michael took it with him. Did you photograph it? I felt foolish. No. That's all right. He tapped his pen against the desk. Did it use the phrase, unable to manage her financial affairs? Yes. And it permitted him to request account information? Yes. Communicate with financial institutions? Yes. That matters. My stomach tightened. Thomas, do you think he is trying to take control of my money? Thomas did not answer immediately. That is not a conclusion I would make without evidence. I nodded. That was why I had come to him. Then he asked a question I was not expecting. Does Michael know the full structure of your finances? No. How much does he know the house is paid off? He knows I have retirement accounts. He probably assumes there are investments. Does he know balances, number trust structure, number current beneficiary designations, number your cash reserves? Number. Thomas nodded slowly. Keep it that way for now. The words unsettled me. Why? Because right now we need facts more than confrontation. He turned toward his computer. Let's start with the question your family seems to be asking. What question? Whether you are managing your finances competently. Despite everything, I almost laughed. You have to ask, I don't. But if someone is building a narrative, I want the records to answer it. That sentence stayed with me. The records. Not Michael's version, not my version. Records. Thomas pulled up several years of account summaries. We went through them together. Retirement distributions, investment changes, insurance premiums, property taxes, charitable gifts, household expenses. Nothing was late. Nothing was missing. Nothing had been transferred into some mysterious account. The $9,000 was exactly where I had said it was. A short-term treasury bill. Thomas printed the confirmation and placed it in front of me. You evaluated the rate maturity date and liquidity before moving it. Yes, that is not random behavior. I know, I'm saying it because someone else may need to hear it, he continued. After David died, I had reduced some of the risk in our portfolio. I had consolidated 3 smaller accounts. I had updated beneficiaries. I had increased the amount I kept in liquid emergency savings. I had adjusted my monthly distributions, so I would not need to sell investments unnecessarily during a market decline. None of those things felt remarkable to me. They were simply decisions. Thomas looked over his glasses. Do you realize your net position is stronger now than it was 18 months after David died? I assumed it was stable. It's better than stable. That gave me no sense of triumph. Money had never felt like winning. After losing David, there was no number on a statement that could make me feel lucky. Still hearing Thomas say, it gave me something I desperately needed. Confirmation. I was not imagining my competence. I had not become reckless. I had not lost track of my affairs. I was doing what I had always done, managing carefully. Thomas closed one spreadsheet. Now let's talk about the open envelope. I can't prove Michael touched it. Then don't accuse him. I wasn't planning to. Good. He paused. Change your online passwords anyway. I already did. For the first time he smiled. I expected you had. And the bank asked them to place a verbal security password on your profile, something Michael would not know. I'll do that. He nodded. Then he opened a drawer in the credenza behind him. From it he removed a navy folder. It was thicker than I expected. I recognized my handwriting on a label attached to the front. Allison Reed, Private Financial Record. I stared at it. I forgot how much we put in there. Thomas rested his hand on the cover. We started this 2 years ago, I remembered. After David died, I had wanted everything organized in one place. Not because I expected trouble, because I did not want confusion later. Thomas and I had agreed to keep a private financial file containing annual summaries, major asset records, estate planning notes, large family transfers, and significant financial decisions. David had always believed family money should be documented carefully. One evening years ago, after Michael borrowed money for a business emergency, David had said something I never forgot. Family and money need better records, not fewer. At the time, I thought he was being overly formal. Now I understood. Thomas opened the folder. Inside were copies of tax returns, investment summaries, property records, beneficiary notes, and transaction logs. There were also pages in my handwriting. Why I had moved money. Why I had changed an investment allocation. Why I had designated certain funds for specific purposes. Thomas pointed to one section. This is useful if anyone ever questions whether decisions were yours. I looked at him. You mean competency? I mean clarity. He chose the gentler word, but we both understood. I ran my fingers over the edge of the file. I never thought I would need something like this because of my own child. Thomas's expression softened. Maybe you won't. I think I already do. He did not argue. Instead, he began reviewing the section labeled Family Advances. That was when his expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. He turned one page, then another, then a third. What? He looked up. Allison, has Michael ever borrowed money from you? The question hit me harder than it should have. Of course he had. More than once. Some of it David knew about. Some of it came later. I had never thought of those moments as a pattern. They had been emergencies. A payroll shortage. A medical bill. A project that went bad. A house payment when cash flow tightened. Each time Michael had promised it was temporary. Each time I had told myself that mothers help their children. Thomas waited. I looked down at my hands. Yes. How many times I thought about it, I'm not sure. He turned the folder toward me. That is why we kept records. I saw the first entry, then the second, then the third, dates, amounts, notes, my own handwriting. For years I had remembered each payment separately. Thomas was looking at them together, and suddenly so was I. He looked at me carefully. When was the last time Michael asked you for money? My throat tightened. About 8 months ago. How much? $75,000. Thomas stopped writing. And did you give it to him? No. Why not? Because he wouldn't show me his company financial statements. For the first time that morning, Thomas's face became completely serious. He closed the folder. Then I think we need to look at Michael's situation more closely. I felt a cold pressure in my chest. Why? Thomas paused before answering. Because if the timing is what I think it is, your refusal may matter more than either of us realized. The first time Michael asked us for money, David wrote the amount down before I had even finished making coffee. Michael was 31 then. His company was still young, and one of his biggest clients had delayed payment on a remodeling project. Payroll was due Friday. He needed $18,000. He sat at our kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug and looked more frightened than I had ever seen him. If I missed payroll, I could lose half the crew. David looked at me. I looked at Michael. Then I asked, when will the client pay? Within 3 weeks. And if they don't, they will. That's not what I asked. Michael rubbed his forehead. I'll figure it out. David finally said, we'll help. Michael's shoulders dropped with relief. Thank you. But David added, we're writing it down. Michael laughed nervously. Dad, I'm not going to disappear with it. That's not why. David pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer. Money gets strange when memory gets involved. Michael shook his head. You make everything formal. David smiled. That's why I still have money to lend you. Michael paid most of that first amount back. Not all of it. We never made an issue of the remaining balance. Then came another emergency. A few years later, one of the children needed medical treatment that insurance did not fully cover. $12,500. I did not even hesitate. That was family. I still believe it was the right decision. Then Michael lost money on a large renovation project. A subcontractor disappeared halfway through the job. Materials had to be reordered. The client refused to release the final payment until everything was fixed. Michael asked for $25,000. By then, David was less comfortable. Where is the business reserve? He asked. Michael looked embarrassed. Tied up. In what equipment? Deposits. Other jobs. David sighed. You're growing too fast. I'm growing because I have demand. That isn't the same thing as being healthy. I remember Michael becoming defensive. You never ran a business. No, David said. But I know what it looks like when someone spends tomorrow's money today. That argument lasted nearly an hour. We gave Michael the money anyway. A year later, he and Rachel nearly lost their first house after 2 projects were delayed and a line of credit was reduced. $31,000. That one caused the first real disagreement between David and me. He has children, I said. He also has a pattern. What do you want me to do? Let them lose their house. I want him to understand that every time he reaches the edge, we build him another bridge. I was angry. He's our son. David's expression softened. I know. Then why are you talking like he's some irresponsible stranger because loving him doesn't make arithmetic disappear? I turned away. David came up behind me and rested his hands on my shoulders. Helping him once is love, he said quietly. Making failure painless every time becomes permission. I hated that sentence, mostly because part of me knew he was right. Still, we helped Michael. Again. Over the years, there were smaller amounts too. 5,000, 7,000, 3,000 here, a few thousand there. Insurance deductibles, business deposits, a tax payment that came due at a bad time. Sometimes Michael repaid us. Sometimes he repaid part. Sometimes the subject quietly disappeared. We never intended to keep score. But Thomas had. Or more accurately, I had kept the records, and Thomas had kept them organized. Sitting in his office now, I saw those years differently. He opened the private file and began adding figures. 18,000. I nodded. 12,500. Yes. 25. Yes. 31. I looked down. There were smaller ones too. I see them. Thomas made several notes. The total was uncomfortable. Not because I regretted every dollar. I didn't. Some of that money protected my grandchildren. Some kept Michael from losing everything during genuine emergencies. But the pattern was undeniable. When pressure came, Michael turned toward us. And for years we had usually answered. David died before the last request. That one had been different. Michael came to my house 8 months earlier, carrying a leather portfolio. He seemed almost cheerful when he arrived. "Mom, I have an opportunity." Those words immediately made me cautious. What kind of development deal? He opened the portfolio and showed me photographs of an older commercial property outside Richmond. His company had been offered part of a renovation contract. If this goes well, it changes everything: how bigger clients, better margins, recurring work. He spoke quickly, excitedly, the way David used to when talking about a project he truly believed in. Then Michael said, "I need some temporary capital." There it was. How much? 75,000. I did not react immediately. From me it would be a loan. For how long? Maybe 6 months. What collateral? He frowned. "Mom, what, you know me?" "I do." "Then why are you talking like a bank? Because you're asking me for $75,000. He pushed the portfolio toward me. "This project is solid." "Then show me the financial statements." His expression changed. "What statements? Your company's balance sheet, cash flow, current liabilities, accounts receivable, existing debt." He gave a short laugh. "You don't need all that." "I do if I'm lending you $75,000. His jaw tightened. "Dad never made me do this." "That isn't true. He trusted me. So do I. Trust and paperwork are not enemies." Michael closed the portfolio. "This is why I didn't want to ask." "Why?" "Because you turn everything into an accounting exercise." I stared at him. "It is money. You have more than you'll ever spend." The room went quiet. Michael seemed to realize what he had said. He tried to correct it. "That came out wrong. Yes, I just mean you're secure. That is not the same thing. Mom, I'm not asking you to give it to me. You're asking me to risk it. It's $75,000. I looked directly at him. "To you, apparently." He leaned back. "You know what? Forget it. Michael, if you bring me the financials, I'll consider it." "There's nothing to consider." "Then why won't you show me?" He did not answer. Instead, he stood. At the door, he turned back and said something I did not fully understand until now. Dad would have helped. Then he left. Thomas listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked, "Did the questions about your finances start before or after that?" I thought carefully. "The serious ones." "Yes. After." "How long after?" "Maybe 6 weeks." Thomas wrote something down. Then he asked for Michael's company name. "Reed Home Renovations." He typed it into his computer. "What are you looking for?" "Public filings first." He searched for several minutes. Then his expression became focused. "Michael has a commercial loan tied to a personal guarantee." I leaned forward. "What does that mean for him?" "If the business cannot meet its obligations, the lender may pursue assets he personally pledged. His house, potentially. Depending on the agreement." My chest tightened. He never told me that. Thomas continued looking. "This doesn't prove his company is failing. But it tells me why $75,000 might have mattered." I thought of Michael asking about my house, my retirement, my beneficiaries, my online banking. Then the stories about my memory began. A terrible possibility slowly came together. What if he needed more than 75,000? Thomas looked at me. "That is what I think we need to determine." I sat back. My anger softened for one painful moment into sadness. Michael was my son. If he was frightened, I could understand that. If his business was collapsing, I could understand shame. What I could not understand was why his solution required making me appear incapable. Then I remembered the timeline. I had refused him $75,000. 6 weeks later, he began telling people I could not manage money. I looked at Thomas. He didn't just start worrying about me. Thomas said nothing. He did not need to. I finished the thought myself. He started worrying about what would happen if I kept saying no. Michael called it an intervention. I called it the moment my family stopped asking whether I needed help and started acting as though the answer had already been decided. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning. I had just poured my second cup of coffee when my phone buzzed on the kitchen table. The subject line was Mom's financial safety. I stared at those 3 words for several seconds before opening it. Michael had sent the message to me, Emily, and Rachel. The first paragraph sounded loving. He wrote that he cared deeply about me, that no one wanted to take away my independence, and that the family needed to discuss recent signs that Mom may be struggling with financial management. Then came the list. The utility payment. The debit card PIN. The $9,000 transfer. Unopened financial mail. My refusal to sign his assistance document. I read the list twice, then a third time. Each incident had been rewritten just enough to make the truth sound suspicious. The utility payment was described as possible duplicate billing. The debit card problem became difficulty remembering banking information. The treasury transfer became a large, unexplained movement of savings. The opened investment statement somehow became financial mail left unattended. And my refusal to sign the authorization was described as resistance to reasonable family support. I felt my face grow hot. It was remarkable how tidy the story looked once the inconvenient details had been removed. If I had been reading about some other 69-year-old woman, I might have worried about her too. That was what frightened me. Michael was not shouting, he was documenting. He ended the email with a suggestion. We should have a family meeting. He wrote that it was better to make decisions before there is a crisis. I could almost hear him saying it. Calm, concerned, reasonable. I did not reply immediately. Instead, I printed the email and placed it beside my yellow legal pad. Then I called Thomas. He answered himself. Did something happen? He sent an email. To whom? Everyone. I read him the subject line. Thomas was quiet for a moment. What does he want a family meeting? And what does he want discussed? My financial safety. Another pause. Then Thomas said, do not argue point by point over email. Why? Because written arguments become more material for people to interpret. So I say nothing. Not nothing. Keep your response simple. I understood. Records not emotion. Facts not panic. I wrote back, I am willing to discuss any concerns. If we are discussing my finances, I would like my accountant present. That was all. Michael replied within 10 minutes. Good idea. His confidence bothered me more than resistance would have. He wanted Thomas there. He clearly believed an accountant would validate him. That afternoon, Emily called. She was already upset. Mom, I booked a flight. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Why? Because I should be there. I closed my eyes. Emily, do you actually believe what Michael wrote? She hesitated. I believe he's worried. That wasn't my question. I don't know what to believe. Her honesty hurt, but I preferred it to pretending. Then ask me. I am asking. No. You're asking whether I'm okay after reading his version of events. That's different. She went quiet. Then she said, Mom, I'm scared. That softened me. Of what? Of what that something is happening, and none of us are handling it right. I looked out the kitchen window. The maple tree in the yard was beginning to lose its leaves. Something is happening, I said. What? Your brother has decided ordinary financial decisions are evidence that I can't manage my life. That's not fair. It may not be what you want to hear. I mean what you're saying about Michael. I almost laughed. Even then she was protecting him. Emily, he contacted my bank without my permission. Silence. What, I told you that? No. You said the bank called you. Because he asked how to become an authorized helper. She exhaled slowly. Maybe he was just asking. He asked after I told him no. That sounds bad, but there is always a but now. She did not answer. Then she said the sentence I had been dreading. Maybe letting Michael handle things would give all of us peace of mind. I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, just enough. All of you. That's not how I meant it. Peace of mind from what? From worrying. About me, yes. Or about whether I'm obeying your brother, Mom. No, Emily, I need you to hear yourself. Her voice trembled. I am not trying to hurt you. I know. And I did. That was part of what made the situation so painful. Emily was not plotting anything. She was afraid. Michael had handed her a set of facts, arranged them into a frightening pattern, and placed himself in the role of responsible son. She was responding to the story she had been given. That did not make it hurt less. When are you flying in? I asked. Friday. The meeting is Saturday, yes. Michael said that works for everyone. Of course he had. I almost said something bitter. Instead, I replied, then I'll see you Friday. When Emily arrived, she hugged me longer than usual. Then she spent the first hour watching me. I noticed immediately. She watched me make coffee, watched me find the sugar, watched me answer a call from the pharmacy, watched me write a grocery item on a notepad. By dinner, I could barely stand it. You can stop checking. She looked embarrassed. I'm not. You are. She lowered her fork. I'm sorry. I looked at my daughter and suddenly felt very tired. Do you know what the hardest part of this is? She shook her head. I'm still exactly who I was 6 months ago, but now everything I do is being examined for evidence that I'm not. Emily's eyes filled. I don't want you to feel that way. Then don't treat me that way. She looked down. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. The next morning, Michael came by. Rachel was with him. He carried another folder. I noticed that immediately. Tomorrow, he said, I think we should talk about simplifying things. What things? Bills, investments, taxes, everything. I folded my arms. And what exactly are you proposing? He sat across from me. First, automatic bill payments. I already have automatic payments where I want them. Then investments. What about them? I could help monitor them. No. His mouth tightened. Tax documents. Thomas handles the tax work. I provide the records. Fine. Then maybe we should talk about power of attorney. There it was. Rachel looked uncomfortable. Emily went completely still. I stared at Michael. A power of attorney eventually. You said this was about helping with bills. It's about planning. For what in case something happens? I could feel the conversation turning exactly where Thomas predicted it would. Michael was not satisfied with one form. He wanted a pathway. Access first, authority later. I did not argue. That surprised all of them. Instead, I said, if we are going to discuss my finances, we should discuss them with someone who actually knows what they are. Michael leaned back. Thomas. Yes. Perfect. He smiled. That smile told me everything. He thought he had won. I thought Thomas would look at my age, look at his list, and recommend that responsible adult children take over before things got worse. He did not know about the private file. He did not know what Thomas and I had reviewed. And most importantly, he did not know how carefully his own timeline had begun to reveal itself. Later that afternoon, Thomas called me. Everyone confirmed for tomorrow. Yes, Michael too. He seems eager. Thomas was silent for a moment. Then he said, good. I looked toward the kitchen table where Michael had first placed that authorization form. Should I bring the email, bank records, my notes? Numb. Nothing, bring yourself. I frowned. That's all. I already have what we need. The calmness in his voice gave me more confidence than any speech could have. I hung up and sat quietly for a while. For months, Michael had controlled the story because he controlled which details everyone heard. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow there would be receipts, statements, dates, records. And for the first time since this began, I was no longer afraid of what my family might think about me. I was wondering what they were about to learn about him. The conference room at Thomas Grant's office was colder than I remembered. Maybe it was the air conditioning. Maybe it was the way Michael sat across from me with a folder open in front of him, as though he were presenting evidence in court. Emily sat to my left. Rachel sat beside Michael. Thomas took the chair at the head of the table. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Michael cleared his throat. First, I want to say this isn't about taking control from Mom. I watched him carefully. It's about preventing a problem before it becomes a crisis. Thomas nodded once. Go on. Michael seemed encouraged. He opened his folder and pulled out a printed copy of the email he had sent us. I think we've all noticed some changes. Emily shifted beside me. I said nothing. Michael continued. Mom has always been good with money. Always been. Past tense. The words cut deeper than I expected. She handled everything when Dad was alive, he said. But things are different now. Banking is different. Investments are different. There are scams everywhere. And she's been making mistakes. Thomas folded his hands. What mistakes? Michael glanced down. The utility bill. Thomas looked at me. May I? I nodded. He opened a thin folder beside him. 2 payments were made within the same billing period, he said. One was the regular utility charge. The second was a deposit related to electrical work required for a water heater replacement. Michael frowned. That's what she says. Thomas slid 2 receipts across the table. No, that's what the records say. Emily leaned forward. Thomas pointed to the first document. Regular monthly utility payment. Then the second. Service deposit. Different reference number. Different purpose. Rachel looked at Michael. He did not look at her. Fine, he said. Maybe that one was misunderstood. Thomas nodded. What else? Michael turned another page. The debit card situation. What situation? She couldn't remember her PIN. I did remember it, I said. Michael ignored me. Thomas pulled another document from the folder. I contacted the bank with Allison's permission. Michael's expression changed. Thomas continued. The card had been replaced after expiration. The activation did not process correctly. The bank's internal service note says the card was rejected before the PIN could be properly validated. Emily looked at me. So it wasn't a memory issue, no, Thomas said. Michael leaned back. I was there when she said the PIN wasn't working. Thomas looked at him calmly. A PIN not working and a person not remembering a PIN are not the same statement. The room became quiet. I felt something unfamiliar. Not satisfaction. Relief. For months, every explanation I gave had sounded defensive because it came from me. Now the same facts sounded different coming from a professional with paperwork in his hand. Michael flipped another page. There was also the $9,000 withdrawal. Transfer, Thomas corrected. Michael's jaw tightened. She moved $9,000 out of savings without telling anyone. Thomas looked almost puzzled. Why would she need to tell anyone? Michael hesitated. Because it's unusual. Thomas turned toward me. Allison, do I have permission to explain that transaction? Yes. Thomas took out another page. The $9,000 purchased a short-term treasury bill after Allison reviewed the rate and maturity date. He placed the confirmation on the table. She did not withdraw cash. She did not send money to an unknown party. She did not lose the money. She moved a portion of low-yield savings into a conservative government-backed instrument. Emily stared at the confirmation. I didn't know that. I know, I said quietly. Michael looked irritated. That still doesn't mean it was a good decision. Thomas turned to him. On what basis? Michael paused. What? On what basis are you questioning the decision? I'm saying she moved a lot of money. For Allison's financial position, $9,000 was not an irresponsible amount. Michael glanced at me. I could see the question in his face. Financial position. He still did not know what that meant. Thomas continued. The funds remained liquid within an appropriate time frame. The transaction fit her existing strategy. Michael crossed his arms. Okay. So maybe she got that one right too. The words irritated me. Got that one right. As though I were a student being graded. Before I could respond, Thomas asked, what else? Michael's confidence had weakened, but he kept going. The mail. What about it? She's been leaving financial mail unopened. My head turned toward him. That is not true. Michael looked at Thomas. I saw statements sitting around. Thomas asked. Were they overdue? I don't know. Were bills unpaid? I don't know. Were accounts neglected? I'm saying the mail was sitting there. Thomas opened his laptop. Allison receives electronic copies of her principal investment statements. Michael stared at him. She reviewed the relevant statement online the same day it became available. He turned the screen slightly, showing a record of account access. The paper copy was redundant. Emily leaned back in her chair. The expression on her face had changed completely. The fear I had seen the night before was being replaced by confusion. Not confusion about me. About Michael. He noticed it too. He closed his folder halfway. This is getting too focused on individual details. Thomas raised an eyebrow. You brought the individual details. Michael exhaled. My point is broader than that. What is the broader point? Michael looked at me, then at Emily. Even if every one of these things has an explanation, Mom is getting older. There it was. The real argument. Not what I had done, how old I was. Michael continued. People don't always notice their own decline. That's why families plan ahead. Thomas said nothing. Michael took that silence as permission. She was good with money once. Once again that sentence. Only this time he said it directly in front of Thomas. I felt something sharp move through me. I looked at my son and wondered when exactly he had placed my competence in the past. Last year, last month. The day I refused him $75,000, Michael kept talking. I'm not saying she has dementia. I'm saying we should have systems in place before something happens. Someone should be monitoring the accounts. Someone should be able to step in. Thomas asked, who? Michael looked slightly surprised. What who should be monitoring Allison's accounts? Well, me probably. I live closest. And who should be able to step in? Michael hesitated. I would. Rachel looked down. Emily pressed her lips together. Thomas leaned back. Why you? Michael seemed offended. Because I'm her son. So is Emily her daughter. Emily lives out of state. Thomas nodded. And what specifically qualifies you to manage Allison's finances? Michael's face reddened. I run a business. Thomas waited. Michael added, I deal with money every day. For a brief moment, Thomas and I looked at each other. Neither of us mentioned what we already knew about that business. Not yet. Michael continued more defensively now. Look, this isn't supposed to be a trial. Thomas nodded. I agree. Then why does it feel like you're trying to prove me wrong? I'm checking the claims you presented. I'm worried about my mother, and I am asking what those worries are based on. Michael pushed the email forward. I gave you the examples, and we reviewed them. Thomas tapped each document. No duplicate payment. Tap. No forgotten PIN. Tap. No unexplained withdrawal. Tap. No neglected financial statement. Then he looked directly at Michael. So what remains? Michael's mouth opened. Nothing came out immediately. Finally he said, preparation. Thomas's expression did not change. Preparation for what? For when she can't do this anymore. When do you believe that will be? I don't know. Has a physician raised concerns? No. Has a bank reported unusual transactions? No. Has the IRS sent notices for unpaid taxes? No. Has she missed insurance payments? Not that I know of. Has any investment professional reported irrational decisions? Michael's voice became quieter. No. Thomas folded his hands again. Then I want to be very precise here. You are not describing an existing financial incapacity. You are describing a possibility that may arise someday. Michael leaned forward. That's exactly why you plan now. Yes, Thomas said. And Allison has. The room went still. Michael frowned. What does that mean? Thomas did not answer immediately. Instead, he stood. He walked across the conference room to a tall cabinet built into the wall. I heard the click of a lock. My heartbeat changed. Emily looked at me. I kept my eyes on Thomas. He reached inside and removed a thick navy folder. The same folder I had seen during our private meeting. Thomas returned to the table and placed it between us. Michael stared at the label. Allison Reed, private financial record. What is that? He asked. Thomas sat down. This is a file Allison established 2 years ago. Michael looked at me. I could see genuine surprise now. Why? Thomas answered before I could. To document her financial decisions, asset structure, annual reviews, major transactions, and other matters relevant to exactly this kind of conversation. Michael's face tightened. I didn't know about this. No, I said. You didn't. He looked at the thickness of the folder, then at Thomas. Does it prove she's okay? Thomas rested one hand on the cover. It contains records. Michael gave a short, nervous laugh. Then open it. Thomas looked directly at him. Are you sure? Michael frowned. Of course. Thomas glanced at me. I nodded. Then he turned back to my son. Michael, once I open this file, some of the information inside may be uncomfortable for more than one person at this table. Michael leaned back, forcing confidence into his voice. That's exactly why we're here. Thomas opened the folder, and as he turned to the first page, I watched my son's expression begin to change. The first page in my private file did not contain a bank balance. That was the first surprise. Michael had leaned forward as Thomas opened the folder, clearly expecting a number. Maybe he imagined a retirement account with too much money in it. Maybe he expected to discover that I had hidden investments. Maybe he thought Thomas was about to prove I had made some embarrassing mistake. Instead, Thomas placed a single-page document in the center of the table. At the top were the words, Annual Financial Competency Review, Allison Reed. Michael stared at it. What is that? Thomas adjusted his glasses. It is part of a process Allison established after David died. Emily looked at me. You had competency reviews, I had financial reviews. Thomas nodded. Competency is simply the internal label we used because Allison wanted a written record that major decisions were being made knowingly and consistently. Michael gave a skeptical laugh. That sounds unusual. It is uncommon, Thomas said. It is not unreasonable. He turned the page slightly so everyone could see it. The document listed categories: tax compliance, cash flow planning, investment allocation, insurance coverage, beneficiary designations, estate instructions, property obligations, major transfers. Each section was marked reviewed. Michael's eyes moved down the page. Thomas continued. After David died, Allison told me she did not want her children to inherit confusion. I remembered that conversation vividly. David's death had forced me to look at our entire financial life as something one person would eventually have to understand alone. I had sat in Thomas's office with 3 folders on my lap and said I don't want anyone fighting later because they don't know why I did something. Thomas had suggested documenting major decisions annually. I agreed immediately. At the time it felt practical. Now it felt almost prophetic. Michael picked up the page. So what exactly does this prove? Thomas answered calmly. By itself, very little. Michael seemed satisfied. Then Thomas added, that is why there are 3 years of supporting records behind it. He turned the next page, then another, then another. For each year since David's death, Thomas and I had reviewed my finances together, not because I needed permission, because I valued documentation. One report showed the retirement distributions I had chosen. Another showed a rebalancing of investments. Another recorded the sale of a small municipal bond fund and the reason I had moved the proceeds. Thomas pointed to the notes. These explanations were written at the time of each decision. Michael looked at me. You wrote these, yes. Why? Because I wanted a record. For who? For myself. For Thomas. For whoever might need to understand later. His eyes narrowed slightly. Did you expect someone to accuse you of losing your mind? The room became uncomfortable. Emily whispered Michael. But I answered him. No. I paused. I expected people to respect records more than memories. Thomas looked at me briefly. I could tell he remembered David saying almost the same thing. He turned to another section. This is the year after David passed. The page showed my portfolio allocation. Thomas explained that I had reduced exposure to several higher-risk investments. I had moved part of the portfolio into bonds and cash equivalents. I had also increased my emergency reserve. Michael frowned. Why, I almost answered, but Thomas did first. Because Allison's situation changed. He pointed toward the figures. She moved from a two-person household with multiple income sources to a single retiree household. That sounds obvious. It is. Thomas looked directly at him. And she recognized it without being told. Michael said nothing. Thomas turned another page. This is the following year. I had adjusted distributions again. Certain investments had recovered, others had underperformed. I chose not to sell several positions during a temporary decline because I did not need the cash. Thomas explained the reasoning. Michael's expression grew more guarded. Then came the most recent year. Thomas placed a financial summary in front of us. He did not reveal every account number or every private detail, but he showed enough. Income, expenses, liquid reserves, investment performance, tax payments, property costs, charitable giving. There were no missed obligations, no unexplained withdrawals, no unpaid balances, no strange loans, no signs of financial chaos. Thomas tapped the page. For the last 3 years, Allison has made every material financial decision herself. Michael crossed his arms. With your advice. Yes. So she wasn't doing it alone. Thomas looked at him. Neither do most financially responsible people. Michael blinked. Thomas continued. Using a CPA does not indicate incompetence. Consulting an attorney does not indicate incompetence. Speaking with an investment professional does not indicate incompetence. Emily lowered her eyes. Thomas added, knowing when to seek professional advice is often evidence of the opposite. That sentence landed hard. Michael looked away. For the first time since the meeting began, he seemed less like a worried son and more like a man searching for another argument. He found one. Okay, she's organized. I understand that. But organization doesn't mean she can still make good decisions. Thomas nodded. That is fair. Michael looked relieved. Then Thomas opened another report. Which is why we also evaluate outcomes. He showed a comparison across several years. I had never cared much about seeing my financial life reduced to a single net figure. Numbers were tools, not trophies. But Michael stared at the page differently. Thomas explained that after normal living expenses, taxes, charitable gifts, and the costs associated with David's final year and estate administration, my overall financial position had remained healthy. More than healthy. My net worth had increased. Not dramatically. Not because I had discovered some miraculous investment. Because I had managed carefully. Avoided unnecessary debt. Kept spending controlled. Rebalanced sensibly. And allowed time to work. Michael stared at the summary. That can't be right. Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly. Which part? Part that she's worth more now than after Dad died. I felt something inside me shift. He did not say I. He said she. As though he were discussing a company, a property, an account. Not his mother. Thomas answered, "It is correct." Michael looked at me. "How much exactly?" The question came too quickly. Rachel turned toward him. Emily did too. I felt the atmosphere change. Thomas closed part of the report. That figure is not relevant to your concern about Allison's ability. Michael looked irritated. If we're discussing whether she needs help, of course it's relevant. No, Thomas said. It is relevant if you are evaluating what she owns. It is not relevant if you are evaluating whether she is competent. Michael's face reddened. I'm her son. Yes. So why is everyone acting like I'm some stranger? Thomas's voice remained even. Because ownership does not transfer through family relationship. I watched Rachel look down at her hands. Something in that sentence had affected her too. Michael leaned back. This is ridiculous. I finally spoke. What is ridiculous? All of this. He gestured toward the documents. You built a whole file to prove you don't need anybody. No. My voice was calm. I built a file because your father and I believed important financial decisions should be documented. Michael shook his head. You could make records say anything. Thomas stopped him. No. His tone changed for the first time. Not louder. Firmer. Records can be interpreted. But dates, tax filings, transfer confirmations, payment histories, signed instructions, and account statements are not opinions. Michael stared at him. Thomas continued. You came here with a list of events you believed showed deterioration. He pointed toward the private file. The records show consistent financial judgment over the same period. Emily looked at me. There were tears in her eyes. Mom. I turned toward her. I didn't want you to worry. She shook her head. No. I should have asked more questions. Michael exhaled loudly. So that's it. We're done. Thomas looked down at the file. We could be. I recognized the hesitation in his voice. So did Michael. What does that mean? Thomas did not answer immediately. I knew what came next. The section we had discussed privately. The one I had not wanted to use unless necessary. I placed my hand lightly on the edge of the folder. Thomas. He looked at me. For a second I considered stopping him. I had never wanted to humiliate my son. Whatever Michael had done, part of me still saw the boy who once brought home a broken lamp and confessed before I even noticed it was missing. But another thought came immediately afterward. Michael had chosen this room. Michael had chosen this audience. Michael had made my financial life a family matter. Thomas seemed to understand what I was thinking. He said quietly, There is one more section that is relevant to why we are here. Michael frowned. What section? Thomas turned several pages until he reached a divider. The label was simple. Family advances and requests. I saw Michael read it. His face changed. Not much, but enough. His shoulders stiffened. His eyes moved toward me. Emily noticed too. What is that? She asked. Thomas kept one hand on the page. I looked at Michael. For months he had asked everyone to examine my financial judgment. Now the records were about to examine his. Thomas did not begin by reading numbers aloud. That mattered to me. Even after everything Michael had done, I did not want the meeting to become a public humiliation. Thomas seemed to understand that. He rested his hand on the section labeled Family Advances and Requests and looked at me first. Allison. Some of the information in this section concerns money you and David gave or loaned to Michael over the years. I know. Do I have your permission to discuss it in front of everyone here? Michael shifted in his chair. Before I could answer, he said, What does that have to do with anything? Thomas turned toward him. That depends on what is in the records. This meeting is about Mom. Yes, Thomas said. And you made her financial judgment the subject of the meeting. Michael's jaw tightened. Thomas looked back at me. Your decision. I stared at the divider. For years I had thought of every payment separately. A crisis, a medical bill, a payroll shortage, a bad project. I had never used those moments to shame my son. But Michael had told Emily I could no longer manage money. He had contacted my bank. He had brought me a document designed to move him closer to my accounts. Then he had gathered us in this room to discuss whether I should surrender control. I took a slow breath. Yes. Michael looked at me sharply. I continued. He made my finances a family matter. Thomas nodded. All right. He removed several pages. First, I want to be precise. Not every amount here was legally structured as a loan. Some were gifts. Some were documented advances. Some were loans with repayment expectations. Rachel looked confused. What amounts? Thomas began carefully. Over approximately 11 years, Allison and David transferred substantial funds to Michael, or for Michael's benefit. Michael leaned forward. I paid some of that back. Yes, Thomas said. And Dad gave me money too. Mom wasn't the only one. That is why I said Allison and David. Michael's face flushed. Emily looked from him to me. How much are we talking about? Thomas glanced at me once more. I nodded. He looked down. The gross amount documented in this file exceeds $140,000. Emily's mouth opened slightly. Rachel went completely still. Michael immediately said, That number is misleading. Thomas did not react. How you're adding everything together. Yes. That makes it sound like I borrowed $140,000 at once. I did not say that. You know how it sounds. Thomas remained calm. It sounds like what it is. Multiple transfers over time, totaling more than $140,000. Emily turned toward Michael. You told me you never took money from Mom. Michael's head snapped toward her. I didn't say never. You did. When we were talking about Dad's estate. Michael shook his head. I probably meant I wasn't living off her. Emily stared at him. That is not what you said. The room grew tense. I remembered that conversation too. After David died, Emily had once commented on how often I helped the grandchildren. Michael had laughed and said, I don't take Mom's money. I earn my own. At the time, I had let it pass. I did not correct him. Maybe I should have. Thomas continued before the argument grew. The $18,000 payroll advance was mostly repaid. Michael nodded quickly. Exactly. The $12,500 medical support was treated as a gift. Rachel looked down. I knew she remembered that one. The $25,000 business advance was partially repaid. Michael said nothing. The $31,000 housing assistance was never fully repaid. Michael's voice sharpened. Dad said not to worry about that. Thomas looked at the file. David's note says repayment would resume when cash flow stabilized. Michael looked at me. You kept notes about that. Your father did. He stared at me as though I had betrayed him. That hurt in a strange way. For years, David and I had been the ones giving. Now the existence of a written record seemed offensive to the person who had received. Thomas did not continue listing every smaller amount. He simply said, there are additional transfers. The point is not to embarrass Michael. The point is that Allison's history shows repeated financial support to her family, often after reviewing circumstances and making deliberate decisions. Michael leaned back. This has nothing to do with whether she needs help now. Thomas looked at him. You're right. The answer surprised Michael. Thomas closed the financial advance summary. Past borrowing alone does not prove anything about Allison's current ability. Michael looked relieved. Then Thomas added, so let's talk about now. The relief disappeared. Thomas reached into another section of the file and removed a single printed sheet. I had seen it during our private meeting. Michael had not. Thomas placed it on the table. Do you recognize this? Michael glanced at it. His face changed almost immediately. What is that, a printed email? I can see that. Do you recognize the sender? Michael did not answer. Emily leaned forward. Rachel did too. Thomas turned the page toward them. At the top was Michael's email address. The date was 3 months earlier. 3 months. Before the intervention. Before some of his strongest claims about me. Michael rubbed the side of his jaw. I email you sometimes. Yes. What was I asking about? Thomas looked at him. You tell us. Michael did not pick up the page. Thomas waited. Finally, he said, I don't remember. That sentence seemed to hang in the air. For months, Michael had used ordinary memory lapses as evidence against me. Now he was the one saying he did not remember something. Thomas did not exploit the irony. He simply read the subject line. Question about aging parent financial access. Rachel slowly turned toward her husband. I felt Emily stiffen beside me. Michael's face reddened. It was hypothetical. Thomas nodded. That is how you phrased it. Emily asked. What did he ask? Thomas looked at me again. I gave permission with a small nod. He summarized the email. Michael had asked what options were available when an older parent became unable to manage money. He had asked how an adult child might gain access to accounts. He had asked whether existing estate documents could allow a child to communicate with banks or investment firms. And he had asked what kind of documentation would typically be necessary if the parent resisted help. Rachel stared at him. You contacted Thomas about your mother. Michael turned toward her. It wasn't like that. What was it like? I was planning. For what? For the future. Rachel's voice became quieter. You didn't tell me. I didn't think I had to. Emily looked sick. Michael, this was before you sent that email about Mom. He looked toward her. So you were already asking how to get access. I was asking what happens if she became incompetent. Thomas corrected him gently. You asked what would happen if an older parent became financially incompetent. You did not identify Allison directly. Michael pointed at him. Exactly. Thomas nodded. But you sent the question to the accountant who manages your mother's financial records. Michael said nothing. Thomas continued. I answered generally. I also told you that financial incapacity is a serious matter and that people should not assume it based on age or disagreement. I remembered Thomas telling me that part privately. Michael had never mentioned receiving that warning. Rachel's face had gone pale. Why did you save this in Allison's file? Thomas answered her. Because the inquiry concerned possible access to the finances of an aging parent, and Michael's mother is my client. I documented it in case it later became relevant. Michael laughed bitterly. So now asking questions is evidence against me? No, Thomas said. Then what are you implying? I'm not implying anything. Thomas tapped the email. I'm establishing chronology. Michael's expression hardened. Thomas continued. 8 months ago, you asked Allison for $75,000. Michael looked at me. I said nothing. She declined without reviewing your business financial statements. She refused, Michael said. She told you she would consider it if you provided the statements. That is basically the same thing. No, I said quietly. It isn't. Thomas continued. Several weeks later, you began raising concerns about her financial management. Michael opened his mouth. Thomas held up one hand. 3 months ago, you asked me how an adult child could gain access if an older parent became financially incompetent. That was hypothetical. Then you contacted her bank about becoming an authorized helper. Michael stared at me. I could see the shock. He had not known the bank told me. Rachel whispered, You called her bank. I asked a question. You called her bank? Yes. Rachel looked away. For the first time since I had known her, she looked afraid of what her husband might say next. Michael pushed the email toward Thomas. This still doesn't prove anything. Thomas nodded. You are correct. Michael seemed almost triumphant. Then Thomas asked one simple question. Did you tell your family how much your company currently owes? Everything changed? Michael froze. Emily looked at him. Rachel's eyes closed for half a second. That was enough. She knew something. Maybe not everything, but something. Thomas waited. Michael's voice was low. My business is none of your business. Thomas glanced at me. It became relevant when you asked Allison for $75,000 and then began seeking authority over her assets. I wasn't seeking authority. You brought her an authorization. For emergencies. You contacted her bank. I was asking. You asked me about access in the event of incapacity. Michael pushed his chair back. I'm done with this. He started to stand. Rachel's hand closed around his wrist. Sit down. Michael looked at her. What? Her voice trembled. You told me things were tight. They are. You said the company needed time. It does. You never told me Thomas knew anything about it. He doesn't. Thomas looked directly at Michael. Then answer the question. Michael stared at him. Thomas repeated it. How much does your company currently owe? Michael did not answer. And in that silence I realized something worse than any number Thomas could have said. My son was not afraid we would misunderstand his finances. He was afraid we were finally about to understand them. Michael stayed standing for several seconds. Rachel still had one hand around his wrist, though she was no longer pulling him toward the chair. She was simply holding on. Maybe to him. Maybe to the version of their life she was beginning to realize had not been entirely true. Finally, Michael sat down. No one spoke. Thomas did not repeat the question. He did not need to. How much does your company currently owe? Michael stared at the conference table. Then he said, It's complicated. Thomas nodded. Business debt usually is. I don't have an exact number. Rachel turned toward him. You told me you did. Michael looked at her. I said I had a handle on it. That is not the same thing. He rubbed both hands over his face. I had seen Michael afraid before, when one of his children was in the hospital, when his first company truck was nearly repossessed. When David died and Michael suddenly looked like a boy again standing beside his father's coffin. This was different. This was shame. And for one brief moment my anger weakened. Then I remembered the emails, the bank call, the stories about my memory, the authorization form. Fear did not erase any of that. Thomas spoke calmly. Let's separate immediate liabilities from total obligations. Michael looked up. You don't know my books, no. But Allison told me about the $75,000 request. I also found the public commercial filing tied to your personal guarantee. Rachel turned sharply. Personal guarantee? Michael's jaw tightened. Rachel, please. What personal guarantee? It's standard. That wasn't my question. He looked trapped now. Thomas leaned back. This would be easier if Michael explained it himself. Rachel stared at her husband. For a long moment, he resisted. Then something in him collapsed. Not dramatically. His shoulders simply dropped. There's a line of credit, he said. How much? Rachel asked. About 110,000. Her face changed. Michael. It isn't all drawn. How much is drawn? He hesitated. 92. Emily whispered. Oh my God. Michael continued quickly, as though speed might make the number smaller. We also owe suppliers. How much? Thomas asked. Maybe 70. 70,000, somewhere around there. Rachel closed her eyes. Michael kept talking. There's equipment financing, a few delayed tax payments. One project is in dispute, so there's money tied up in receivables. Thomas asked, tax liability. Michael looked away. About 46. And equipment 60-something. I felt the figures stacking in my head automatically. 92, 70, 46, more than 60, already well over $250,000. And that was before whatever else he had not said. Thomas asked the question I was already calculating. What is the approximate total exposure? Michael swallowed. Just over 300. Rachel stared at him. $300,000. It isn't all due tomorrow. You told me we were behind because 2 clients hadn't paid. That's part of it. You said we were tight. We are. You didn't say we were $300,000 tight. Michael's face flushed. Rachel, please don't do this here. She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Where would you prefer I do it? He said nothing. I looked at my son and suddenly understood why $75,000 had mattered so much. It had never been about one opportunity. It had been oxygen. Maybe enough to cover payroll. Maybe enough to quiet suppliers. Maybe enough to make the line of credit look manageable for another month. But not enough to solve the real problem. Thomas asked, how much of the debt carries personal guarantees? Michael's eyes hardened. Most of the line. And the equipment? Yes. What about vendor obligations? Some. Rachel's voice dropped. What does that mean for our house? Michael turned toward her. It doesn't mean they're taking the house. I asked what it means. He rubbed his forehead. It means if things go very badly, personal assets could be exposed. Rachel looked as though the room had tilted beneath her. You knew this, yes, and you didn't tell me I was trying to fix it before you needed to worry. Her eyes filled with tears. You were trying to fix it with his mother's money. The sentence hit the table like glass breaking. Michael looked at me. That's not fair. I finally spoke. Then tell us what is fair. He shook his head. I asked you for a loan. And when I refused, you didn't refuse because you couldn't afford it. You refused because you wanted paperwork. Yes. He gave a bitter laugh. Exactly. I stared at him. You say that as if paperwork was unreasonable. I was desperate. Then you should have been more willing to show me the truth, not less. Michael's voice rose. I knew what you would do, what judge me. The word surprised me. Michael, I helped you for years. That's different. How Dad was alive. There it was again. David. The invisible standard against which Michael seemed determined to measure both of us. I leaned forward. Your father asked questions too. He still helped. He also warned me that we were making failure too easy for you. Michael went completely still. I had never said those words to him before. They belonged to a private conversation between husband and wife. But now they seemed necessary. He said that yes. Michael looked hurt. For a moment I hated being the one to cause it. Then I remembered the hurt he had caused me publicly. Not as revenge, as truth. He stared at the table. I was trying to save my company, Thomas asked. By doing what? Michael shook his head. I don't know. Then tell us what you hoped access to Allison's finances would accomplish. Michael looked at Thomas, then at me. I was cornered now, not by accusations, but by sequence. The $75,000 request, my refusal, the competency narrative, the accountant email, the bank inquiry, the authorization. He knew we could all see the pattern. Finally he said, I thought if I could manage some of Mom's accounts, I could help her and maybe… He stopped. Maybe what Emily asked. Michael closed his eyes. Maybe there would be options. What options? I asked. He did not answer. Thomas did, alone. Michael said nothing. Home equity, still nothing. An investment in the business. Michael looked angry. I never had a final plan. That isn't what he asked, I said. Michael turned toward me. I wasn't going to steal from you. I didn't say steal. You're all making it sound like I was going to take your money. Then explain what you were going to do. His voice cracked. I thought if you understood how serious it was, you might help. I asked you to show me how serious it was. You would have said no. You don't know that. Yes, I do. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen since he was young. Angry, frightened, almost pleading. You would have looked at the numbers and told me the company was in trouble. It is in trouble. I know that. The room went silent. His voice dropped. I know. Rachel looked at him. Michael kept his eyes on me. I thought if I could get you to let me handle more things eventually, I could show you what we needed. Maybe borrow against the house. Maybe use some investments. Maybe put money into the business temporarily. I felt cold. My house. He immediately raised both hands. I said maybe. The house I own. I know. The house your father and I paid for. I know. Without asking me directly. I was going to ask. When he did not answer. After you convinced everyone I couldn't manage money. His face tightened. That's not why I said those things. Then why did every example make me look less competent because I was worried? No, Michael. My voice surprised even me. It was quiet, steady. You needed me to become less credible than my refusal. He stared at me. Emily covered her mouth. Rachel looked away. I continued. You asked me for $75,000. I asked for financial statements. You would not show them. He said nothing. So instead of proving your business deserved my money, you began proving I could no longer be trusted to decide what happened to it. Michael's eyes filled. I was scared. For one moment I saw him clearly, not as a villain, as my frightened adult son who had made a series of terrible choices and then made a worse one because he could not bear the consequences. And I felt compassion. But compassion is not the same thing as surrender. I believe you, I said. He looked almost relieved. Then I added, fear explains what you did. It does not make it acceptable. Rachel wiped tears from her cheek. Emily stared at her brother. Thomas remained silent. Michael spoke again, softer now. I was trying to keep my family from losing everything. And what were you willing to risk for that? I asked. He looked at me. I answered for him. My independence. His face broke. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did. I let the words remain between us. No yelling, no punishment, just truth. After a long silence, Thomas placed his hand on the private file again. There is one more matter we need to clarify. Michael looked exhausted. What now? Thomas glanced at me first. Then he said, your plan appears to have been based on an assumption about Allison's assets. Michael frowned. What assumption? That eventually most of them would belong to you and Emily. Michael's expression changed. He did not deny it. Thomas continued. And before this meeting ends, you need to understand that assumption is wrong. Michael slowly sat straighter. I watched confusion replace fear. For the first time that day, my son was about to discover that he had not only misunderstood me, he had misunderstood the future he had already begun spending. Michael looked at Thomas as though he had misheard him. "What do you mean wrong?" Thomas did not rush. He closed the section about Michael's debts and turned to another divider inside my private file. This one was labeled Estate Structure and Long-Term Intentions. Michael's eyes dropped to the words. I watched him carefully. For years I had avoided discussing exact numbers with my children because I did not want my life reduced to what might remain after I died. Now I realized Michael had filled that silence with assumptions. Thomas said, "Michael, when you thought about using Allison's house or investments to help your business, what exactly did you believe would happen to those assets eventually?" Michael looked uncomfortable. "I don't know." Thomas waited. Michael sighed. "Mom has 2 children." "Yes. So naturally, Emily and I assumed things would eventually come to us." Emily turned sharply toward him. "Don't include me in that." Michael looked at her. "You never thought about it. Thinking about Mom's estate someday is not the same as building plans around it." "I didn't build plans around it." Rachel gave him a look that made him stop. I leaned forward. "Michael, tell the truth." He looked at me. The anger had mostly left his face now. What remained was embarrassment. Finally, he said, "I thought the house would eventually be split between Emily and me. And the investments?" He hesitated. "The same. And because you believe that, what did $75,000 look like to you?" His jaw tightened. Alone. Against what he said, nothing. I waited. Michael eventually muttered, "Against what would eventually be ours." The words hurt more than I expected. Not because I had never imagined leaving something to my children. I had. Of course I had. David and I had worked hard, partly because we wanted our children and grandchildren to have opportunities we did not. But there was something deeply different between hoping to leave your children something one day and realizing one of those children had already begun counting it. I stared at him. "Say that again." Michael looked up. "Mom. No. I want to make sure I heard you." He swallowed. "I thought if I borrowed against something that would eventually come to us anyway, it wasn't really taking from you." For a moment I could not speak. Emily looked horrified. Rachel covered her mouth with one hand. Thomas remained still. Finally I said, "You were spending my death while I was still alive." Michael flinched. "That's not what I meant." "It is exactly what you meant." "No, I meant someday after what." He stopped. I could feel my heart beating heavily. I was not shouting. I did not need to. "You looked at my house, my retirement accounts, my investments, and you stopped seeing the life they were supposed to support." Michael's eyes dropped. "You started seeing an inheritance. I never wanted you dead. I didn't say you did." I paused. "But you had already assigned my assets a future owner." The room was silent. Then Thomas opened the estate section. "There is another reason this assumption matters." Michael looked at him. Thomas removed several summary pages. "These documents were not created because of what happened recently." Michael frowned. "When were they created?" "The core plan was updated approximately 2 years ago." His expression changed. 2 years. Yes, that mattered. It meant I had not changed my estate plan in revenge. I had not rushed to an attorney after the bank call and written Michael out in anger. This had existed long before any of that. I said, "After your father died, I had to reconsider what I wanted my estate to do." Michael looked at me. "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because it was my estate plan. That affects us." "It may affect you someday. That does not make it yours today." Thomas turned to the summary. "Allison's children are still included." Michael looked surprised. I almost found that sad. Perhaps part of him had already assumed I would punish him by removing him completely. I had not. Thomas continued. "But the structure is not a simple 50-50 division of everything." Emily leaned closer. "What is it?" Thomas explained carefully. A portion of my estate would pass through structured trusts, not unrestricted lump sums. Part of the funds were designated to support educational expenses for my grandchildren. Another portion was committed to a community scholarship program in Richmond. David and I had both cared deeply about education. Neither of us came from families with much money. A scholarship had allowed me to attend community college and earn the bookkeeping credentials that eventually gave me a career. I had always wanted some of what we built to create that opportunity for someone else. Michael listened without interrupting. Then Thomas moved to the house. The residence is not guaranteed to pass directly to either child. Michael frowned. What does that mean? It means Allison retains complete control. I know she owns it now. Thomas shook his head. You are still thinking about the house as though its final destination has already been decided. Michael said nothing. Thomas continued. If Allison needs assisted living, long-term care, medical support, relocation expenses, or simply chooses to sell the house and spend the proceeds, she can. Michael's face tightened. All of it, I answered. Yes. He looked genuinely stunned. That expression told me how deeply rooted his assumption had become. I said, the money exists to support my life first. Michael leaned back slowly. And whatever is left will be handled according to the estate plan. Rachel looked at him. Something about her expression had changed. There was disappointment there, but also realization. She was seeing how much of their future had quietly been built around money they did not own. Thomas continued. The investment accounts are also not simply waiting to be divided. Michael asked why structured trusts. I answered this time. Because your father and I talked about what inheritance should do. He looked at me. We wanted it to help not become something anyone depended on before receiving it. Michael stared at the table. I knew those words sounded painfully relevant now. David had worried about this years before any of us understood how serious it might become. Not because he thought Michael was bad, because he understood our son's tendency to borrow confidence from the future. A larger project would fix the last one. The next client would solve the cash flow problem. The next season would be better. The next opportunity would make the debt worthwhile. And apparently someday my inheritance would rescue everything else. Thomas said, there is also something important you need to understand legally and practically. Michael looked up. What being a potential beneficiary does not give you present ownership. Michael gave a tired laugh. I understand that now. Do you? Thomas's voice was not cruel. Just exact, because the financial strategy you described today depended on treating expected inheritance as though it were current family capital. Michael said nothing. I looked at him. That was the truth at the center of everything. He had not walked into my house planning to rob me. That would almost have been easier to understand. Instead, he had convinced himself that my money was already partly his in some moral sense. And once he believed that my refusal became unreasonable, then inconvenient, then evidence that perhaps I should not be making the decision at all. I said quietly, do you understand why this hurts? Michael's eyes filled again. Yes. No. Tell me. He took a long breath. Because I treated your money like it was waiting for me. I nodded, and his voice dropped. Because I acted like your future mattered less than mine. That was the first thing he had said all day that sounded like accountability rather than defense. Emily wiped her eyes. Rachel stared at her hands. I looked at my son and felt grief more than anger. You could have come to me and said your business was failing. I was ashamed. You could have shown me the books. I knew what they would say. You could have asked for advice. I didn't want advice. What did you want? Michael looked at me. A rescue. The honesty of it almost broke my heart. Thomas closed the estate's summary. Michael stared at the private file for several seconds. Then he asked, so there was never some guaranteed amount waiting for me? No, I said. There was never a guaranteed house, no. And the estate plan was already like this before all of this happened. Yes. He leaned back. For the first time, I saw the full weight of his mistake settle over him. His business strategy had not only depended on money he did not control. It had depended on an inheritance that existed mainly in his imagination. He had risked our relationship trying to reach something that had never belonged to him. And now he finally understood that the greatest financial mistake in that room had never been mine. For 3 days after the meeting, I did not answer Michael's calls. He called the first evening, then the next morning, then twice that afternoon. I watched his name appear on my phone and let it ring. That was not revenge. It was the first boundary I had set without immediately feeling guilty about it. For years, whenever Michael had a crisis, I had answered. Money, business, children, marriage, home repairs, unexpected bills. I had trained both of us to believe that if he reached for me, I would respond. This time I needed silence. The morning after the meeting, I called a locksmith. Michael still had an emergency key to my house. I had given it to him out of trust. After the opened envelope, the bank inquiry, and everything that followed, trust was no longer enough. The locksmith changed the front and back locks in less than an hour. When he left, I stood in the doorway holding 2 new keys. For a moment, I felt terrible. Then I reminded myself that changing a lock was not the same as changing my heart. I also called my bank. At Thomas's suggestion, I added a verbal security password that had nothing to do with birthdays, children, pets, or anything Michael could guess. I changed my online passwords again. I confirmed that no one except me had access to my accounts. Then I put all my current financial mail into a locked drawer in my desk. None of those actions made me feel powerful. They made me feel sad. This was my son. I wanted a relationship with him. I simply no longer wanted that relationship to include access to my financial life. On the 4th day, Michael showed up at my house. He knocked. That alone felt strange. For years he had used his key. I looked through the window before opening the door. He stood on the porch alone. No Rachel. No folder. No laptop. No documents. Just Michael. When I opened the door, he looked at the new lock. You changed it? Yes. He looked hurt. I did not apologize. Can I come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside. We went to the kitchen. The same kitchen where he had asked about my mortgage. The same table where he had pushed the authorization form toward me. The same room where I had once believed every question came from love. Michael sat down. I remained standing for a moment before taking the chair across from him. He looked exhausted. I'm sorry, he said. I waited. He rubbed his palms together. I should never have called the bank. I said nothing. I should never have involved Emily like that. Still, I waited. And the document. I should have explained it better. That was where I stopped him. No. He looked up. What, you should not have explained it better? He frowned. You should not have brought it at all. He looked down. Right. There was another silence. Then he said I was scared. I had expected that. In fact, I believed him. His company was drowning. His home might have been at risk. His wife had not known the full truth. His pride had trapped him inside a problem he no longer knew how to solve. But fear did not rewrite what happened. I know you were scared. He looked relieved. Then I said, fear explains what you did. It doesn't excuse it. His eyes dropped again. I never wanted you to think I was trying to take your money. You were trying to get closer to controlling it. That sounds worse than what I meant. What did you mean? I thought if I could help manage things, eventually we could talk about using some of it. I stared at him. That is exactly what I just said. He leaned back. I know. For once he did not argue. I waited. Finally he said, the company got away from me. The confession came slowly after that. A large project had been delayed. Then another client withheld payment over disputed work. Michael used the credit line to cover payroll. Then supplier bills stacked up. I took another project hoping the deposit would create breathing room. It did not. Each decision bought him another few weeks. Each week made the final problem larger. I thought I could fix it before anyone knew, he said. Rachel. He shook his head. She knew things were tight. She didn't know how bad. And you thought my money would solve it. I thought it could buy enough time. You asked me for $75,000. I needed more than that. I know. His face tightened with shame. I couldn't tell you. Why? He looked around the kitchen. For several seconds, I thought he might avoid the answer again. Then he said, Dad. I stayed quiet. He built everything slowly. He never got himself into trouble like this. Your father made plenty of mistakes, not like mine. You don't know all of his mistakes. Michael smiled faintly. No, I guess I don't. Then his expression darkened again. I spent my whole life thinking I had to show him I could build something bigger. The sentence surprised me. Your father never asked you to be bigger than him. I know that now. He looked down. But after he died, I felt like every bad decision proved something. Proved what? That maybe he had been right not to trust some of my ideas. I remembered David's warnings, growing too fast, borrowing tomorrow's money, making failure painless. Maybe Michael remembered them too. I didn't want to admit the business was failing, he said. So you decided my judgment was the problem instead. His face tightened. I know how that sounds. It sounds like what happened. He nodded. That mattered. No excuses, no correction, just acknowledgement. I folded my hands. I am not paying your business debt. Michael did not react at first. Then he asked, Any of it no? He closed his eyes briefly. What if I lose the company, then you lose the company? The words hurt me to say. He opened his eyes. You can say that I can. You know what I built. Yes. You know how many years I know. My voice softened. But I also know that giving you money again would only move the consequences a little farther down the road. He stared at me. So you're just going to let me fail? No. I leaned forward. I'm going to let you deal with the truth. He laughed bitterly. That sounds nice when you say it. It isn't nice. I felt tears pressing behind my eyes. You think this is easy for me? He looked away. If I could write a check and guarantee you would become responsible afterward, maybe I would. Michael said nothing. But I cannot buy that guarantee. The room went quiet. Then I said, I will help you in another way. His eyes returned to me. How Thomas knows a restructuring accountant. Michael frowned. I don't need another accountant telling me I'm broke. You need someone who understands distressed businesses. He looked skeptical. What is he going to do? Look at everything. Everything. Debt, receivables, contracts, payroll, equipment, taxes, personal guarantees. Michael's face tightened. That sounds humiliating. So was being told by my family that I could no longer manage money. He flinched. I did not say it cruelly. I wanted him to understand. Real help may not feel comfortable. He looked down. What else? You tell Rachel everything. He immediately stiffened. She already knows now. She knows the headline. She needs the books. He rubbed his face. And you may have to sell assets. My truck, possibly. He gave a humorless laugh. Rachel hates that truck. Then perhaps something good will come from this. For the first time, a tiny smile appeared, then disappeared. You may have to shrink the company, I continued. I spent years building it, and you may spend years rebuilding it differently. He was quiet. Finally, he looked at me. So you're really not going to help me? I knew what he meant. Money. Rescue. The familiar answer he had received so many times before. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. I am helping you. His eyes filled. I'm just not rescuing you. He looked down at our hands. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he nodded. Once. Slowly. Okay. It was not reconciliation. Not yet. Trust did not return because someone said sorry. But it was the first moment since all of this began when Michael stopped trying to change my answer. And that gave me something I had almost stopped believing was possible. Hope. Not that I could save my son, but that maybe finally he was willing to start saving himself. 8 months later, Michael drove to my house in a used Ford pickup with a dent above the rear wheel. The expensive truck he had once been so proud of was gone. So was one entire division of his company. He had sold 2 pieces of equipment, let several employees go, renegotiated contracts, and spent months working with the restructuring accountant Thomas had recommended. It had not been graceful. It had not been painless. But for the first time in years, Michael was dealing with numbers as they actually were, instead of as he hoped they would become. His company survived, smaller, leaner, less impressive from the outside, but alive. Rachel went back to work part-time for a medical office, something she had not planned to do until their youngest finished high school. They cut vacations, stopped eating out several nights a week, sold the recreational trailer they had barely used. Michael told me they had even started making a written household budget together every Sunday evening. When he said that, I almost smiled. Almost. Healing is strange. Sometimes the thing that once caused the deepest wound later becomes proof that something has changed. Michael also began sending me money. The first check arrived 3 months after our meeting. $200. No explanation. I called him immediately. What is this payment? For what? One of the old loans. Michael, I'm not asking you to repay me right now. I know. Then why are you doing it? He was quiet for a second. Because I need to. The next month, another $200 arrived, then another. The amount was small compared with what he owed. That was not the point. For the first time, repayment was not something David or I had to remind him about. He was choosing responsibility without being chased toward it. I kept every check record in the same private file Thomas had opened that day, but the notes I wrote beside them were different now. Payment initiated by Michael. No request made. It felt important to record that too. Emily and I had our own rebuilding to do. She apologized more than once. At first I told her to stop. Then I realized I was doing what mothers often do, rushing to remove discomfort before the lesson had time to settle. So one evening when she visited from North Carolina, I let her speak. We sat on my front porch with iced tea while evening traffic moved quietly through the neighborhood. I keep thinking about how quickly I believed him, she said. You believed your brother was worried. I also believed something else. What? She stared at the condensation running down her glass. That because you were getting older, the story was plausible. I did not answer. She looked at me. That's the part I'm ashamed of. Emily. No, I need to say it, so I let her. If Michael had told me 10 years ago that you paid a bill twice, I would have laughed. If he told me your debit card didn't work, I would have assumed the bank made a mistake. If you moved $9,000, I would have assumed you knew exactly what you were doing. She swallowed. But now you're almost 70, and suddenly every normal mistake sounded like a warning sign. Her eyes filled. I didn't realize I was doing that. I looked out at the yard. The hardest part was never the money. I know. No, I don't think you do. She waited. The hardest part was watching people who had known me my whole life begin looking at me as if my age had become evidence. Emily wiped her cheek. I'm sorry. This time I let the apology remain between us. Then I said, getting older will change me eventually. Maybe one day I will need help. She nodded. But help should begin with respect, not assumption. I understand. I hope you do. She reached over and took my hand. We sat quietly until the porch light came on automatically. Trust with Emily returned faster than it did with Michael. She had been wrong, but she had not engineered the situation. With Michael, I needed more time. He seemed to understand that. He no longer used his old key because he did not have one. He knocked. He stopped asking about my accounts. He never asked how much I was worth after that meeting. He did not ask whether I had changed the estate plan. He did not ask what he would inherit. That silence meant more to me than any apology could have. Then came the Saturday morning when everything finally shifted. Michael knocked around 10. I opened the door. He was holding a plain black folder. For 1 second my body reacted before my mind did. A folder. The last time he had carried paperwork into my kitchen, he had wanted my signature on a document that could have moved him closer to controlling my finances. He must have seen the hesitation on my face. This isn't for you to sign. I looked at him. What is it, my budget? I said nothing. My business budget, he added. For next year. I stepped aside. We walked into the kitchen. He sat in the same chair he had occupied 8 months earlier. The folder stayed closed between us. Michael looked nervous, not defensive. Nervous. I've been working on this with the restructuring accountant. That's good. He says the numbers work. Then why are you here? Michael gave a small smile. Because I want another opinion. Thomas. He shook his head. You. I stared at him. He continued. Not because you owe me anything. My throat tightened. And not because I want money. He placed one hand on the folder. I just thought, maybe you could look at it. I remembered the conference room. She was good with money once. The sentence that had hurt me more than almost anything else. Now my son sat across from me voluntarily asking for my judgment. I did not open the folder immediately. Why me? Michael looked almost embarrassed. Because you're better at this than I am. The words were simple. They carried 8 months of consequences inside them. I sat down. Michael pushed the folder toward me. I listed projected revenue, fixed expenses, debt payments, payroll, and a reserve target. A real reserve, he smiled. Yes, Mom. A real reserve. And no borrowing against imaginary future money. His smile disappeared. He looked down. No. I regretted the sharpness immediately, but Michael nodded. I deserved that. No, I said. I'm not trying to punish you. I know. That mattered too. I opened the folder. His spreadsheet was not perfect. The projected revenue was optimistic. The equipment maintenance allowance was too low, and he had underestimated how much cash he would need during his slowest quarter. I pointed to the revenue line. What happens if this comes in 15% below forecast? Michael looked at the sheet. We would still cover fixed costs. What about payroll? It gets tight. Then this projection is too aggressive. He nodded and wrote a note. No argument. I turned another page. This equipment number. What about it? You spent more than that this year. That was because the van transmission failed. And machines never fail when budgets are prepared. He laughed. Fine. He crossed out the number. For nearly 2 hours we worked through the budget. Sometimes we disagreed. Once Michael defended a marketing expense for 10 minutes before finally admitting he kept it because he liked how impressive the advertising looked. I raised an eyebrow. So we're budgeting for ego now. He laughed harder than I had heard him laugh in years. No, good. Ego has terrible cash flow. For a moment it felt like the old days. Before suspicion. Before inheritance. Before my age became an argument. Not exactly the same. Maybe better in one important way. We were finally speaking as two adults. When we finished, Michael closed the folder. Thank you. You did most of the work. I know. He stood. At the doorway he paused. Mom? Yes, I'm glad you said no. I stared at him. To the 75,000, to all of it. His voice lowered. I hated you for it for a while. I know. If you had given me the money, I would have burned through it. I did not disagree. And then I probably would have needed more. Yes. He looked down. I thought you were refusing to help me. I know. But you were refusing to help me lie to myself. I felt tears rise before I could stop them. Michael stepped forward and hugged me. I held him. Not because everything had been repaired. It had not. Trust does not return all at once. Some things would always be different between us. And perhaps they should be. But standing there, I understood something I had spent months learning. My money had never been the most important thing Michael tried to take from me. It was my authority over my own life, my right to make decisions, my right to say no, my right to grow older without automatically becoming less worthy of being believed. And when I protected those things, I did not destroy my family. I gave my son the chance to become responsible for himself. I gave my daughter the chance to question assumptions she did not realize she carried. And I gave myself something women of my generation are often taught to surrender too easily: permission to belong to myself. Michael left that afternoon carrying his budget folder. I stood at the door and watched him walk toward that dented old truck. 8 months earlier, I might have looked at the vehicle and felt sorry for him. This time I felt something else. Pride. Not because he had saved the company. Not because he had begun repaying me. And certainly not because he had finally admitted I was good with money. I was proud because for the first time he was living inside the consequences of his own decisions without demanding that someone else remove them. As for me, I went back inside. My yellow legal pad was still on the kitchen counter. I turned to a clean page. For months, I had used that pad to document problems. That day I wrote only one line. Michael asked for advice, not access. I closed the notebook. Some records exist to protect you from what happened. Others remind you how far you have come. What I learned from everything that happened with Michael is that love and surrender are not the same thing. For years, I believed being a good mother meant stepping in whenever my child was frightened, embarrassed, or in trouble. I thought love meant making the burden lighter. Sometimes it does. But there comes a point when rescuing someone can become another way of helping them avoid the truth. And the truth matters. Getting older does not make us less intelligent, less capable, or less deserving of respect. Age may change our bodies. It may slow certain things down. One day, many of us may genuinely need help. But help should never begin with someone taking away our voice. It should begin with listening, honesty, dignity, and consent. I also learned that financial boundaries are not acts of cruelty. Your savings are not selfish. Your home is not selfish. Your retirement is not selfish. And an inheritance is not money your children already own, simply because they may receive something someday. We spend decades building our lives. We make sacrifices no one sees. We survive losses, raise families, pay mortgages, work through exhaustion, and save little by little. We are allowed to use what we built to protect our own future. But perhaps the deepest lesson was about forgiveness. Forgiveness does not require pretending nothing happened. You can forgive someone and still change the locks. You can love someone and still say no. You can rebuild a relationship without immediately restoring the trust that was broken. Real healing begins when apologies are followed by accountability. Michael did not change because I rescued him one more time. He changed because for once I loved him enough to let him face the consequences of his own choices. And I changed too. I stopped believing that protecting myself meant I had failed as a mother. Sometimes the strongest form of love is a boundary. Sometimes the most loving word you can say is no. And sometimes losing control of the story people tell about you is exactly what teaches you to stand firmly in the truth of who you are. If you were in my place, would you have forgiven Michael? Would you have trusted him again after what he did, or would that boundary have remained permanent? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I would especially love to hear from anyone who has ever felt underestimated because of their age or pressured by family over money. And if stories about family dignity, betrayal, boundaries, and second chances mean something to you, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next one. Your experiences matter here. Your voice matters here.